it's worth acknowledging this unusual times that we live in and the unusual. Normally, I do a book launch at a bookstore, and there's, white wine and red wine afterwards. And you're welcome to have white wine and red wine afterwards at your house, in the comfort of it. Some people are already indulging. I see Larry McCaffrey, but I'm guessing with Larry, it's probably gin and tonic. In any event, you're welcome to stay for drinks afterwards at your house. And, but to acknowledge these unusual, the theme this week seemed to be, I don't know if you felt the same way. The theme this week seemed to be is like, are we really going to return to something, or is everything different, completely different from here on out? So this is either an aberrant book launch, we'll return to regular book launches down the way and bookstores and all the rest, or this may be among the very first avant-garde moments of book launching, and you're right here in my spare bedroom watching it happen. Congratulations. So I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then it goes to Q&A. And this is the book, right? This is the book. And where it comes from is this. Wait a minute. Al, could you hold that up again? There have been some modest sales out there, I see, In any event, as most of you know, I think, I have two lives. I was a professor and an academic critic and a scholar and all that. But then on the weekends and at night, I didn't have a rock and roll band, but I was a literary journalist. And I wrote for the New York Times and a lot, and the LA Times a lot, and then other places, Paris Review, Nation, New Republic, on and on and on. Quite a few. But that was that's what my left hand did. That was my weekend job, right? And so it occurred to me that I would, look at that work. I mean, let's see here. We'll be muted. Yeah, I want you guys muted. It occurred to me that like my scholarship was accessible, but this other half of my life as a literary journalist was not accessible. And that I would, go through there and collect the stuff that was there. I mean, of course, those two lives, I say they're separate, but I mean, as an academic, I was always talking to my fellow academics about trying to make their scholarship more accessible to, regular human beings. And even as a literary journalist, I remember this one guy said, "Oh, you're one of those big picture guys." One of those big picture guys. You do a book review and they just want the, the plot and so forth, but I was going to put it in the big picture, right? So, but talking about these two things separately, here was this, it was obviously it couldn't be collected works because I think I counted at one time, there were 300 print publications and about 200 items on the internet. So it was going to be selected. Who'd want to read collected anyway? And then the question became how to select it. And it occurred to me, that I was looking at what was my interest in these subjects. And oftentimes it was to indicate their depth or whatever, especially with children's books. People assume that, you check your mind at the door and superficiality is in order. And I felt this sort of evangelical urge to, indicate things were deeper than that. So hence behind children's books where the title came from and the concept by which I could approach this huge body of work. I mean, huge. When I was cleaning out my mother's house, she had a drawer with a stack of like Nation magazines and New Republic. She had the actual physical copies, and I had a moment of contrition when I think of how many trees I had done in during the 1970s. Any event, looking at those and using that principle of selection to choose things behind children's books. So where's the depth of it? So the chapters are organized in that sort of revelatory way, the backstory way, how things work. There's essays on how picture books work, how maps function in children's books, what's the real usefulness of nonsense, and so forth. Biographical disclosures. Hans Christian Andersen was really hung up on sex, and it made him feel uneasy, and I revealed that. And Roald Dahl, the loss of a 6-year-old daughter to measles, and how that generated the BFG, and how Hugh Lofting's Dr. Dolittle books were started when he saw injured horses being shot and killed in World War I, and he thought that was unfair. So things like that, political agenda. One of like the really incredible selling books has been Rush Limbaugh's Pilgrim series, the first of which was about the Thanksgiving holiday. And I mean, it was up there on the bestseller list of the New York Times. And so, but still critical people weren't like looking at it. And so I showed how Rush Limbaugh was sort of like trying to dragoon the Thanksgiving holiday into a sort of right-wing fest. Explaining things like why bears appear so frequently in children's books or so forth. So anyway, that was the principle of selection. Those are the sort of approaches. The result was like 60 essays, chosen and collected in that book. And they're different from my academic stuff. One, because they're for the general reader rather than the specialist reader. I often have to say something about the story and what transpires, where generally speaking in scholarship, you assume that the person reading something you've written about a book has read the book. Also, another different sort of quality to this book is it's much more personal. I mean, I had the good luck to be friends with Maurice Sendak and Jim Marshall and Pamela Travers and so forth. So I talk about that in a very personal way. And but I think the most conspicuous quality of this book, I mean, as I said, there's 60 items in here, is brevity. I mean, generally speaking, as a scholar, I'm writing at length and so forth. But here, collecting them, I was enjoying so much how I had packed so much information in the small amount of space newspapers or magazines give you, and the short attention spans of people who read those kind of things. How I could pack so much. I began to think of them, as I said in the introduction, as little bouillon cubes, And so there's 60 of them collected there, and the taste of this particular work. I don't know if, Al, could you hold up your copy again there? Thanks. There we go. There's 3. We've already made a sale. Thanks, Michael. The taste that's so conspicuous in this new book is brevity. And so I've spent a little time thinking about brevity, and this is where I'll conclude. When Nietzsche's statement is, I mentioned this in the introduction, was sort of inspiring to me, where Nietzsche said, I'd rather say in 10 sentences what takes others have to spend a whole book talking about. So brevity, of course, we've got a president who does tweets, and that's often seen as a sign of attention deficit disorder. But I'm thinking about the positive side of this, we can call it a genre of brevity. Pascal's Pensées would be an example. Also, epitaphs. My favorite epitaph is Merv Griffith, the television personality. When he died, he had put on his tombstone, I will not be right back after this message. That was Merv Griffith. Of course, Oscar Wilde's witticism, Yogi Berra, Borges only liked to write short stuff. When he got an idea for a novel, he would insert it into a short story as a book review, refer to a book he never wanted to write. Also, of course, flash fiction. People who in 6 words write a novel. That's the challenge. And the best has been so far, 6 words, a novel, for sale, wedding dress, never worn. There's a story there. And of course, another phenomenon, shrinklets, people who summarize a literary work in a sentence. And here's the summary for the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey. Man refuses to ask for directions. But today is the day The Wizard of Oz was published, right? On this day, May 17th, 1900. The best of these kind of things, it was a TV Guide entry for the classic movie, The Wizard of Oz. I'm going to read it twice because it's so precious. TV Guide, Wizard of Oz. Transported to a surreal landscape, a young girl kills the first person she meets and then teams up with 3 strangers to kill again. Again, The Wizard of Oz. Transported to a surreal landscape, a young girl kills the first person she meets, then teams up with 3 strangers to kill again. So that's the taste, brevity. That's a sort of a conspicuous part of this book, right? So I'm done talking about the book, and I hope you'll find occasion to talk about it yourself in public circumstances. But we're now at the question